Good evening, fight fans. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And this is Chapter 6 of our History of Heavyweight Boxing podcast. Tonight, we look at the first half of the career of Muhammad Ali, who at this stage of the game was first known as Cassius Clay. Joining me as he has on the previous 5 chapters is the punchy pugilist, Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
Good afternoon / evening / morning, wherever you are listening to us, in whatever time zone you are listening to us. And good day to you, Mark.
How you holding up, Pat?
I'm doing fine. I've invented some imaginary friends. We just went out to an imaginary bar and did some imaginary shots. Well, mine were real. Theirs were imaginary. So it's been fine. I haven't seen any kind of craziness from the isolation or anything like that. Not at all. No, I'm fine. Great. What year is it?
I had to explain to my kids yesterday who Mad Max was and what the Road Warrior is. So when I kept making Mad Max, we're living in Mad Max times jokes, they knew what I was talking about. Which is always a fun thing.
No, like immediately once the hey, if you're not essential, stay home order started. I work in a pretty busy area in downtown Brooklyn, and I literally got off the subway and the streets were just vacant. So I was like, this is Mad Max.
Yes. I'll tell you what, the only time I ever hit traffic now is if I try to get fast food. Those are nightmares.
Oh, I can only imagine the drive-thrus. There's times I miss having a car, there's times I don't.
Yeah, you're not missing much. Well, our story begins in Louisville, Kentucky. Muhammad Ali, as he is famously known, was born Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr., on January 17, 1942. He began training at the age of 12. As the story goes, Ali was first directed towards boxing by Louisville police officer and boxing coach Joe E. Martin, who encountered the 12-year-old fuming over a thief's having taken his bicycle. He told the officer he was going to whoop that thief. You're going to whoop that trick, Pat. The officer told Clay he had, you better learn to box first there, Chippy. So Clay made his amateur boxing debut in 1954 against local amateur boxer Ronnie O'Keefe, which he won by split decision. Cassius goes on to win 6 Kentucky Golden Glove titles, 2 National Golden Glove titles, and an Amateur Athletic Union national title. At the age of 18, he won a gold medal in the light heavyweight division at the 1960 Summer Olympics. Clay made his professional debut on October 29, 1960, winning a 6-round decision over Tony Hunsaker. From then until the end of 1963, Clay amassed a record of 19-0 with 15 wins by KO. He defeated boxers including Tony Esperte, Jim Robinson, Donnie Fleeman, Alonzo Johnson, George Logan, Willie Besmanoff, Lamar Clark, Doug Jones, and Henry Cooper. Clay also beat his former trainer and veteran boxer Archie Moore in a 1962 match. Now, before we go any further, Pat, the first 19 fights, what do we learn about Muhammad Ali and his style, the style that would define him for the first half of his career?
We learned that this guy is not like anybody we've ever seen. And in a good way, because what we see from this guy is unbelievable, maybe more than anything in the early part of his career especially, the reflexes at his disposal. You see a guy in there with his hands down, moving to the wrong side, and just not eating clean punches. He's landing so much. His hands are, just so fast. His feet are even faster. and we just see him putting these punch combinations together. He's definitely an anomaly in terms of that. Through these first 19 fights, he's doing things we have not seen a heavyweight do. And a lot of Ali the early Ali especially, is compared to being a heavyweight Sugar Ray Robinson, because that was Ali's boxing hero and who he wanted to be. And what we see there is a lot of the same stuff: dazzling footwork, quick hands. But Ali does things a little differently. He's not as orthodox as Ray Robinson was. And we see that tested a couple times. We see it tested against Doug Jones, who's a very capable veteran, and what was, through the first 19 fights of Ali's career, arguably his toughest opponent. Some people feel that he won that decision, and some people didn't, because the crowd actually booed when Ali got the decision over Doug Jones.
Yes, some would call it uninspiring.
Yeah, that night at the Garden, there were 25 riders ringside. 13 had it for Doug Jones, 10 had it for the then Cassius Clay, and 2 called it even. Very close fight. Fight of the year for 1963. What we go to after that is kind of, if you thought that was uninspired, Ali fights the Englishman Henry Cooper, who's known for 2 things: a big left hook and a propensity to bleed like there is no tomorrow. Ali said if the fight got out of the 5th round, he wouldn't come back to the United States for 30 days after the fight. He's kind of cruising along pretty easily. He opens up a nasty cut above the eye of Cooper with his glove, where the heel of the glove wound up catching him, and it wound up splitting the seam on the glove. That's important. Well, what happens is, at the end of the 3rd round, Cooper clocks him with a left hook that has him dead to rights. He is out of it. Cannot think of any, if you want to see Ali really look out of it, watch how he reacts to that. His head is limp on the bottom rope. What happens is Angelo Dundee, the veteran cornerman and Ali's trainer for years and years, looks at the seam on the glove, uses it as an excuse to buy time between rounds, saying they need another glove. This is, a split seam. You can't have it. They try hitting up sporting goods stores to get another pair of gloves. A long time passes where Ali gets his senses back. He's able to get up, work over the cut, and stop Cooper in the 5th round on cuts. Yeah, and, one of the things I don't think Angelo Dundee gets enough credit for is his ability to be a great matchmaker for a talent to bring them along correctly. Because even you go through his first, let's go through his first 15 fights, right? Of those guys, you have Alex Mitchev, Willie Besmanoff, and Sonny Banks, who at one time or another were all ranked in the top 10, but on the downside of their careers. There's stuff there enough to test Ali, and Ali actually gets dropped by Sonny Banks for the first time in his career. They were dangerous enough to test him but not to hurt him, and could make him work. Archie Moore was more a case of, it was almost a revenge fight where Ali took on Archie because they just didn't like each other, and Ali had a big mouth and wanted to beat Archie up a little bit, and Archie wanted to get in there and try to teach the young punk a lesson, but was too old to do it. Jones, again, very capable veteran, not a heavy puncher, so not going to threaten Ali in that sense, but a guy with very good boxing skills who pushed him to what was his limit then. And Henry Cooper, who hit hard enough to trouble him and almost beat him, but force him to find another way to win. So Ali, at this point, when he's 19-0 and about to challenge for the title, he's seen most obstacles that you want a young fighter to see and be tested by the time they get to a title shot.
One of the things you have to know about Muhammad Ali is, yes, he is known to be a fantastic fighter. In his early career, he was known as a fighter that was hard to hit, though, as Pat noted, sometimes he got hit and nearly defeated. But overall, the thing you notice about Ali, as Pat said, is his footwork, his quickness. He was a defensive fighter.
Anomaly.
Anomaly. A defensive fighter who made you miss him, and he was able to counter with the best of them. But you can say that about a great many fighters throughout the ages. What made Ali different, and this coming from the Jack Johnson school of how to get over, Ali during this period perfected his persona. Ali perfected his outlandish, some might say heelish persona. In each of the aforementioned fights, Clay vocally belittled his opponents and vaunted his abilities. He called Jones an ugly little man and Cooper a bum. He said he was embarrassed to get in the ring with Alex Mataf and claimed that Madison Square Garden was too small for me. His provocative and outlandish... I love Muhammad Ali. His provocative and outlandish behavior in the ring was inspired by professional wrestler Gorgeous George Wagner. For those of you kids who don't know who Gorgeous George was, he was... Boy, if you think an effeminate wrestler today now is a bit anachronistic and, it's not right for these woke times, oh boy, going back to the 50s, Gorgeous George was this like fop wrestler. He frequently yelled, "Don't touch me." He had these wonderful curly locks, and he pranced around the ring, but he could kick your ass. He made people hate him because he acted effeminate. And this is the 50s, where men were men and the sheep were frightened. And you just could not act that way without riling up Joe Lunchpail. And so he did, and he got over, and he was amazing. So Ali stated in a 1969 interview with the Associated Press, Hubert Mizell, that he met with Gorgeous George in Las Vegas in 1961, and that the wrestler inspired him to use wrestling jargon when he did interviews. And this, I think equally, sometimes maybe even more so, is what Muhammad Ali was known for. What do you think about that, Pat? What do you think about the relationship to Gorgeous George and, him being a black man in the early 60s and going out of his way to annoy people?
It was bold. It was definitely bold because, again, still a ton of racial tension at the time. So you're talking a high level of risk that doesn't exist today with doing that kind of stuff. Patterning yourself after someone who did that to that time was one of the biggest box office draws is undeniably brilliant. Because, again, notoriety is how you're going to get paid. You want people to pay attention to you. What's going to separate you from being heavyweight champion of the world from the previous guys who've been heavyweight champion of the world, especially during these times? So Ali was bombastic, had this colorful persona where he healed, but the difference being, whereas Gorgeous George would, do things like rub soap flakes in the eyes of opponents or, spray perfume, etc., Ali had the ability to infuriate you, but what he could also do by being as good as he was in the ring is win you over and make you want to see that exhibition of skill again. So it was a perfect storm for him to be able to create this persona and then deliver these virtuoso performances in the ring where every eye was on him because initially people went in there wanting him to lose, and many still left wanting him to lose.
Sure.
But again, the real educated viewers were seeing these skills put on display that they hadn't seen before and were starting to become believers in, this kid, there's something different about him.
Heels sell tickets. Heels get people to come to the show because they want to see the heel get his ass kicked. And a heel that is chicken shit and runs away and won't let you beat him up just riles up people. It's so easy to fall into the hands of the performer who manipulates you in such ways. And yes, half the audience who's even a little boxing savvy will recognize that he isn't running, he is boxing. This is Floyd Mayweather, this is Shakur Stevens, this is so many of the fighters who get a mixed reaction from people because I think the average person goes to a fight because they came for blood, as they said on The Simpsons. You know, they want to see guys deck each other. But many love the sport of kings for the technicality of it all. And so Ali brought both fans to the audience. The ones who came for blood, namely his, and the ones who recognized that they were watching greatness unfurl in the ring and wanted to continue to see him perform and outperform some of these guys who, like we'll talk about later, like a Sonny Liston, who was a big giant bear. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment. Who was just mauling people. Any other thoughts on this before we move on?
No, let's go.
Okay. So 1961 is a really important year in the life of Cassius Clay, as this was also the year he converted to Islam. Clay had first heard of the Nation of Islam when he was fighting in the Golden Gloves tournament in Chicago in 1959, and attended his first Nation of Islam meeting in 1961. In 1962, Malcolm X became his spiritual and political mentor. He would continue to be known as Cassius Clay, and the Nation of Islam really didn't recognize him as a member until after he fought Sonny Liston in 1964. Oh, then they were all about it. They couldn't wait for him to be part of the Nation of Islam. It was also at that time he was rechristened Muhammad Ali. Which brings us to February 25th, 1964, when Ali vies for the heavyweight title for the first time against the Big Bear, Sonny Liston. So, as Pat mentioned, going into this fight, Clay put on some, again, uninspiring performances against Doug Jones and Henry Cooper. Also, if you'll recall from our previous podcast, Liston had recently decimated Floyd Patterson in 2 first-round KOs. Clay was the underdog going into this fight. Despite this, however, Clay taunted Liston during the pre-fight build-up, dubbing him the Big Ugly Bear, stating, "Liston even smells like a bear," and claiming, "After I beat him, I'm going to donate him to the zoo." Ouch. Clay turned the pre-fight weigh-in into a circus, shouting at Liston that someone's going to die in that ringside tonight. Clay's pulse rate was measured at 120, more than double his normal 54. Many of those in attendance thought Clay's behavior stemmed from fear, and some commentators wondered if he would even show up. Now,
it also almost postponed the fight.
Why did they almost postpone the fight?
Because the doctors were afraid that he was not going to be medically fit because of his heart rate.
Ah, that's funny. Talk about working yourself into a shoot, right? So, just a recap of what we discussed with Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay. At the opening of the bell, Liston rushes Clay, seemingly angry and looking for a quick knockout. However, Clay's superior speed and mobility enabled him to elude Liston, making the champion miss and look awkward. At the end of the first round, Clay opened up his attack and hit Liston repeatedly with jabs. Liston fought better in round 2, but at the beginning of the third round, Clay hit Liston with a combination that buckled his knees and opened a cut under his left eye. This was the first time Liston had ever been cut. At the end of round 4, Clay was returning to his corner when he began experiencing blinding pain in his eyes and asked his trainer Angelo Dundee to cut off the gloves. Dundee refused. It's been speculated that the problem was due to ointment used to seal Liston's cuts, perhaps deliberately applied by his corner to the gloves. Though unconfirmed, boxing historian Bert Sugar claimed that 2 of Liston's opponents also complained about their eyes burning. Despite Liston's attempt to knock out a blinded Clay, Clay was able to survive the 5th round until sweat and tears, your 2 best friends, rinsed the irritation from his eyes. In the 6th, Clay dominated, hitting Liston repeatedly. Liston did not answer the bell for the 7th round, and Clay was declared the winner by TKO. Liston stated the reason he quit was an injured shoulder, as we talked about, and following the win, a triumphant Clay rushed to the edge of the ring and pointed to the ringside press like you do, and shouted, "Eat your words!" he added, "I am the greatest! I shook up the world! I'm the prettiest thing that ever lived." At the age of 22, he became the youngest boxer to take the title from a reigning heavyweight champion. And then, of course, the Nation of Islam welcomed him in with open arms. So, Pat, Ali Liston won, huh?
Yeah, what a fight. In terms of, you have this seemingly unbeatable champion in Sonny Liston, who has just dominated the heavyweight landscape. Everybody is terrified of him. He's got the best jab you've ever seen. He's a thug and a mean guy, like we talked about in the previous installment of the show. And then he comes out and meets this athletic phenom who makes him look slow, awkward, and beats him with the jab. The punch that Sonny Liston has that nobody can touch, Ali's out jabbing him. Busts him up when he cuts him under the cheekbone. Actually broke his cheekbone with the same punch. And there's a psychology here that Ali's going to employ later on against another opponent who we'll talk about in another episode. But, Ali is a dancer and a mover, absolutely. But in this, he would set his feet as soon as Liston would miss an exchange and hit him as hard as he could to set the tone to let Sonny know, not only can you not hit me, but when I hit you, it hurts. You didn't take me seriously, but now this right hand that just busted up your cheekbone is cutting you open. You are in pain because of me, and I'm going to keep doing this to you. And, most people, myself included, never bought the idea that Liston had injured his shoulder and had to quit on his stool. We all think the same thing, that it's out of embarrassment and discouragement that he didn't want to continue to take this beating from this guy with this big mouth that he was so sure he was going to knock out. Where, we talked about Ali's pre-fight antics where he left and some other stuff happened. He left a bear trap on Sonny's front lawn. Harassed him at a casino where Liston pulled out a starter pistol to scare the crowd away. But Liston only had one thing to say about Ali. He called him a fag. So much like the response Gorgeous George would elicit from a lot of the audience, Ali elicited that response from Sonny Liston. And, the thought was, even though Ali had some names on his resume, the lack of dominant performances against them really made people think that Liston was going to destroy him in short order. And, of course, instead we see Ali rise to the occasion and just put on one of the better performances we'll see in a heavyweight title change when we examine them, where he's just dominant with the exception of one round where it was very clear there was something wrong with his vision because he's employing a very high guard, trying to move as much as he can, and holding on whenever he can, which is something this iteration of Muhammad Ali does not do.
It is really a testament to his ability that half-blinded he can still move around the ring and still mostly avoid being hit. And I'm with you. I think whatever happened in that fight, he mentally broke Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston, it's funny, and I want to throw this at you, Pat, and just kind of kick this back and forth for just half a second. There are fighters who say, I've never been hit with a less hard punch than the ones from Muhammad Ali. But Muhammad Ali has also knocked people out. So what do you make of the claim that Muhammad Ali is known for pitter-patter punching when there's evidence to the contrary in a vast array of knockouts hither and thither?
There were definitely times where he was on his bicycle, and Ali had a weird pattern of moving. It's become known as the cross step, where Ali would actually cross his rear leg behind his front leg to the opposite side and flick his jab out and extend his right hand to get further reach on his jab and maintain balance. Now, when you get what Teddy Atlas calls the happy feet, a lot of times it will take the steam off of your punches, even if you're throwing them and throwing them fast. But, again, I think when you see Ali is one of the guys who mentally could adjust and knows when it's the right time to just dazzle you and maybe just move his hands enough to make you have to occupy yours by being defensive with them. And then coming back and actually sitting down on his punches because he thinks it's the right opportunity to try and hurt you. I think when you have as many knockouts as Ali does against this high-profile opposition and quality opposition as he does, then you're talking about a guy who can punch. And Ali could punch. He wasn't going to go in there like Rocky Marciano or Jack Dempsey and look to rip you apart and sit down and try to kill you with every punch he threw. That's not his game. That's not what he was about. But he had the ability to absolutely stand there and hit you with some amazing shots.
I think he's not a slight fellow, but I think his frame, his constant talking about his good looks, I would never call Muhammad Ali a fop, but he definitely had a way about him that would elucidate from an opponent this idea that I'm gonna beat this cream pie. This guy can't stand, and like we talked about, like Floyd Patterson had kind of a thinner frame than some of these other people that we've been discussing, and Muhammad Ali is a fairly broad-shouldered fella. I think he gave off this aura, again, much like Gorgeous George, of come on, you can beat me up, and then they'd get in there and they can't even hit the guy, and then he would score all these punches, and so he was going to win no matter one way or the other. He'd either hit you so many times he'd win the round on points, or eventually he'd overwhelm you and you'd get knocked out, as we'll talk about in a few more fights.
And also, part of that coming into play, he was immaculately conditioned at all times. Even when he gave his lackluster performances in the ring, he was a phenom when it came to getting into the gym, doing his road work, all of that stuff. Angelo Dundee used to yell at him because he would do too many miles in the morning, and Angelo would be afraid that his legs wouldn't be there during a fight. So you're talking about a guy who conditioned his body in extreme measures, running 6 miles instead of 3, doing a ton of abdominal work because he figured if I'm not going to give them my head, I might take some punches to the body, so it needs to be able to endure. He was a nut when it came to conditioning.
Well, cardio wins fights. It absolutely does. If you can breathe, you can fight.
Cardio and durability.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's so he'll sit out about a little over a year, due to a surgery and some other stuff that was going on at the time. But ultimately, he would have a rematch with good old Sonny Liston on May 25th, 1965. And of course, we talked about this in the last podcast. This was known as the Phantom Punch incident, which also gave way to the famous picture that accompanies this podcast of Ali standing over Sonny Liston, yelling, "Get up!" No one will believe this. Unbelievable. So, just to recap, referee Jersey Joe Walcott did not begin the count immediately after the knockdown, as Ali refused to retreat to a neutral corner. Liston rose after he had been down for about 20 seconds, and the fight momentarily continued. However, a few seconds later, Walcott, having been informed by the timekeepers that Liston had been down for a count of 10, stopped the match and declared Ali the winner by knockout. The entire fight lasted less than 2 minutes, and the punch, I believe, is like a right hook that drops him. And
it's Liston's reaching, lunging in, throws a lazy jab, and Ali throws a punch. We'll see him throw a lot. It's called the anchor punch, where it's guided up and over and sinks in over the top to the opponent. It's a quick right hand counter that was taught to him by Step and Fetch It. And it lands. We'll see it in a couple other fights we talk about on this very show, but this is the most pronounced version of it because of the notoriety surrounding this fight and what happened, and that it's almost silly in hindsight to think about this being called the Phantom Punch because people didn't see it at the time. It is sort of a testament to Ali's hand speed, but at the same time, when you actually go back and watch the fight, it's very clear that there's a punch and it lands.
Yeah, I rewatched it before we recorded tonight, and that's why I said it, like you called it an anchor punch. Just in layman's terms, it looks basically like a downward check right hook, and as he's lunging, so it's very low. Because then he follows it up with a cross, and he goes over a tumbling Sonny Liston. And then the other bit of controversy that came out of that was could he have gotten up again? And, let's give the man a degree of credit here. He may have just been done. He may have mentally checked out and be like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Because to believe that he threw the fight, or the Nation of Islam pressured him into throwing the fight, or the mob pressured him into throwing the fight, I think tarnishes an already murky career legacy of Sonny Liston, and it's not something I would prefer to do. So I almost
I
rather
don't
believe
buy either theory.
Huh?
I also don't buy either of those theories.
Yeah. I would prefer to believe that he got hit, he went down and said, fuck it, life's too short.
Well, and again, let's look at something we talked about before, and let's specifically reference the fights between Joe Walcott and Rocky Marciano. Walcott goes ahead and fights the best fight of his career for the first 12 rounds he's fighting Rocky. And just despite that, Rocky still comes, still fights, and still eventually gets him in the 13th. The next time they fight, in their rematch, he gets hit with that same kind of punch and devastation that Rocky brought the first time, and he goes down. And to the belief of many of us, he had already lost that fight when he lost that first fight. Because the psychology and the mentality is, I just did everything I could do possibly to beat this guy, and it wasn't enough. In terms of this fight, where, again, the psychology is different, because now Ali's the champion. He's already gone in there, humiliated and embarrassed Sonny Liston, and dominated him with superior boxing ability. Now that he doesn't have any fear really left of Sonny Liston in terms of what he could potentially do, this second fight he goes right at him when it starts. It's not the same as the first fight, where in the first fight he went out, made Sonny miss, made him do that to get into his head. This time he's already in his head because he's already taken his title. Now he goes out there as champion and the aggressor and takes the fight to Sonny. And eventually when he makes Sonny commit to that mistake, lands that punch and drops him, I don't doubt that was a hard enough punch to drop Sonny because of the way it landed. It's a great counter shot. It was a blind shot. Those are often the ones that will hurt you or make you fall because you didn't prepare for them. I do think he could have gotten up. I don't think he wanted to, more just because of the psychology of the first fight playing into this one. He already did everything he could possibly try to do to beat this guy, and he couldn't do it. He doesn't know how to figure him out. And after that, it's very clear to him that he's not going to. The hell with it. I'm not getting up. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I agree. With that said, we move on to his next fight. Later that year, November 22nd, 1965, he fights former champion Floyd Patterson. Gentleman, Floyd Patterson. Now, Ali, such a shit. Such a shit, ladies and gentlemen. This poor man. Before the match, Ali mocked Patterson, who was widely known to call him by his former name, Cassius Clay, as an Uncle Tom, calling him the Rabbit. Although Ali clearly had the better of Patterson, who appeared injured during the fight, the match lasted 12 rounds before being called on a technical knockout. Patterson later said he had strained his sacroiliac. Ali was criticized in the sports media for appearing to have toyed with Patterson during the fight. Patterson biographer W.K. Stratton claims that the conflict between Ali and Patterson was not genuine, but was staged to increase ticket sales and the closed-circuit viewing audience, with both men complicit in the theatrics. Stratton also cites an interview by Howard Cosell in which Ali explained that rather than toying with Patterson, he refrained from knocking him out after it became apparent Patterson was injured. Patterson himself later said that he'd never been hit by punches, that's why I was talking about this earlier, his punches as soft as Ali's. Stratton states that Ali arranged the second fight in 1972 with the financially struggling Patterson to help the former champion earn enough money to pay a debt to the IRS, which we talked about in the previous podcast. So your thoughts on Ali Patterson 1 in 1965?
I think it was an exhibition in cruelty. Yeah. I absolutely believe that, based on especially the people Ali was associating with at this time, the Nation of Islam, and really more so than Malcolm X, more the influence of Elijah and Herbert Muhammad, who had become his management team. Really more them, because Patterson was seen as a white man's champion in his term. He had been to the White House and shook hands with JFK, and Patterson was pretty much accepted by everybody as because he was such a gentleman in and out of the ring. That this was an opportunity for Ali to humiliate somebody who refused to recognize his new name as Muhammad Ali instead of Cassius Clay. And he mocked Patterson's style openly with the name The Rabbit, because when we covered Floyd, we saw that his best offensive weapon was a leaping left hook, hence the Rabbit name. But if, I showed you an abridged version of this fight, and what we saw was Ali really stepping up his cruelty with a very strong jab. And that's where I think Patterson's back injury came from, because when you fight out of a crouch and you are constantly forced to shift your weight back straight up like Ali made Patterson do just from that jab, it's going to make your back stiffen up, hurt, and hyperextend when you have to do that. And eventually you're not going to be able to stand up straight whether you want to or not. And I think that's what happened to him. Ali just continually snapping him with the jab. And Ali at this point in time, like we said, he could be an absolute killer if he wanted to. He had the opportunity. Patterson was dead to rights multiple times. And yet Ali just brutalizes him and carries him essentially to the finish line in this fight in the 12th round when it's mercifully stopped. And Patterson really offered him nothing. The one takeaway I have from this fight that a lot of people suggest, and I disagree with, is that they used this fight as an example of how Ali had the fastest hands of any heavyweight. And I disagree with that. I still think Patterson had faster pure hand speed than Ali. The difference was, one, Ali had better reflexes, especially defensively. He had better foot speed and movement. And he also enjoyed a significant height and reach advantage that allowed him to exploit these things.
So, now we get to it. The thing that this era is really known for, post-winning the title, the mark on his career in a way. This is the road to exile. From March 29th, 1966 through March 22nd, 1967. Ali and then WBA heavyweight champion boxer Ernie Terrell had agreed to meet for a bout in Chicago on March 29th, 1966. The WBA, one of two boxing associations, as we know, had stripped Ali of his title following his joining the Nation of Islam, like you do. But in February, Ali was reclassified by the Louisville Draft Board as 1A from 1Y, and he indicated that he would refuse to serve, commenting to the press, "I ain't got nothing against no Viet Cong. No Viet Cong never called me a nigger." Amidst the media and public outcry over Ali's stance, the Illinois Athletic Commission refused to sanction the fight, citing technicalities. However, our intrepid hero, despite all of that, Ali traveled to Canada and Europe and won championship bouts, and we'll talk about these in a moment, against George Chuvalo, Henry Cooper, Brian London, and Carl Mildenberger.
Mildenberger.
That's what I said. Mildenberger. So let's stop there for just a moment before he returns to the United States in 66. What do you think of these international fights that he has, as he is actively avoiding going to Vietnam? Chuvalo, Cooper, London, Mildenberger.
Very smart tactically to keep him going. And the guys he fights, of those guys, he's got history with Cooper, so why not do it? Nobody's going to scoff at Cooper, who had been the European heavyweight champion and the British Commonwealth champion. Chuvalo wasn't seen as a threat. Chuvalo was a known heavyweight and a tough, durable guy who would make Ali work. It became a huge draw in Canada for Ali to defend the title there against Chuvalo. It did a huge gate at Maple Leaf Gardens, and Ali won, 12 to 13 rounds of the fight. It wasn't very competitive, but George made him work for every round, and there's a lot of good action for such a one-sided fight. The Cooper fight was kind of a rehash to the first fight, just without the knockdown. He stops our Enery, as the British called him, on cuts again. at the 6th round instead of the 5th. Brian London was seen as an easy mark. It was one of those things where Ali did well in England, so they're going to do it there again. It's largely a country he's comfortable in, knows the language, that type of thing. And he makes pretty short work of London. The Mildenberger fight was an interesting one.
Boy, if I don't think there's ever been a more frustrated man in a ring than Carl Mildenberger was with Muhammad Ali. That you could see smoke coming out of his ears at some point.
Right, and the irony is it started the complete opposite way, where Ali really was at a very high peak of frustration fighting Mildenberger. And Mark, what's unique about Mildenberger that we haven't seen from any of Ali's other opponents?
I don't know, Pat. Tell us.
He's a lefty.
Aha!
And this is the first time in this entire podcast we're covering a southpaw heavyweight.
Ah, interesting.
So Mildenberger, from Germany, he's the German heavyweight champion, eventually became the European heavyweight champion, is the first time since the finals of the Olympics that Ali will see a southpaw. And Ali's style has very much been refined from what it was as an amateur. But as a heavyweight, we talked about at the top of the show, Ali does a lot of things wrong from a technical standpoint. He constantly circles to his left, which against a right-handed fighter you're not supposed to do because you're circling towards their powered hand. But with his cross step and his reflexes, he's able to do it and set himself up to constantly always be in position to land his jab because of the nature of the stances. Now, against the southpaw, you are supposed to circle to your left if you're an orthodox fighter, because what you then do is control the range of punching because your lead foot is outside of their lead foot, and what it allows you to do is dominate with your lead hand and stop theirs. However, because of the nature of Ali's cross-stepping, it actually makes him a very easy target for Mildenberger's lead hand, and it also frustrates him because he's also having a hard time landing any punches through the first 2 rounds of that fight. If you look at that fight and the first 2 rounds, Ali lands maybe 5 or 10% of what he's throwing. It is not a common Ali performance by any stretch of the imagination. He's having a hell of a time trying to find Mildenberger, and Mildenberger's enjoying every bit of it. So I like this fight a lot because one of the things it does is really show you how bright Ali is in terms of innovating and creating on the fly. When Ali sees that his regular tricks are not working and he can't figure out what to do, he starts analyzing what may work for him. And only someone like Ali can do this, where he begins to fight Mildenberger like he would fight like you are supposed to fight an orthodox stance fighter. He starts moving to his right. And what that does is now he can constantly land his jab inside. Because of that, he can use his left hand to parry Mildenberger's right hand. And by stepping inside, he's also able to lead with his right hand, which is something we're going to see him do later on in his career. But he does it here for the first time and tends to walk Mildenberger into it. And once we get to that 5th, 6th round, like you're talking about, Mildenberger, you can see the steam coming off of him because he's just gone from having all the success in the world against the best heavyweight in the world that nobody gave him a shot against, to now it's turning into the fight that people thought it was going to look like. And he just gets punished for the remainder of that. But this is one of those fights where it's definitely a maturation moment, and one of those times where you're like, man, this guy's brain is on another level when it comes to how to strategize during a fight.
It's one of the things that really does make him one of the greatest of all times, because it isn't just about throwing punches, and it isn't just about knockouts. It's about persevering through challenge and adversity, and being able to think, as you said, and strategize and call it in the ring when things aren't going your way. You have to be able to change gears, and I think the ability to do that, to be a thinking man's fighter, is what separates the truly great from merely the really good. He will win a TKO over Karl Mildenberger. This fight took place in Frankfurt, West Germany.
At the time, it was West Germany.
Yes, September 10th, 1966. In the 12th round of 15 in a minute and 30 seconds. Our intrepid hero comes home after this. He returned to the United States to fight Cleveland Williams in the Houston Astrodome on November 14th, 1966. The bout drew a record-breaking indoor crowd of 35,460 people. Williams had once been considered among the hardest punchers in the heavyweight division, but in 1964 he had been shot at point-blank range by a Texas policeman, like you do, resulting in the loss of one kidney and 10 feet of his small intestines. Yikes. Ali dominated Williams, winning a third-round tactical knockout in what some consider the finest performance of his career. Now, where do you stand on Cleveland Williams, Pat?
Big Cat was a great puncher. I don't know that he ever had the complete toolbox you would have needed to become the heavyweight champion. But even after that incident, the punch was still there. The guy could just plain hit. He was a monster. And even though at this point in time he's past his best in terms of his career as a fighter, which that's not a secret. Even Ali himself, after this fight, said, I don't think I'm really impressed with myself because I don't think I fought him when he was at his best. It's still a magnanimous performance where Ali puts the full exhibition of his skills on display. He makes Williams miss immediately in the first round, is able to dazzle him with his hand and foot speed. Then in the second round, which is maybe the best round of Ali's career if you're looking at dominance, he drops Williams 3 times with multiple different punch offerings. First time he drops him, he hits him with a right hand that he walks him into. The second time, he hits him with a counter left hook. The third time, and he almost has him out, is a beautiful combination punctuated by a right hand that Williams just beats the count by at the end of the round, to the point where the third round, when it starts, is basically a formality. Williams gets pummeled a little bit, and the ref steps in and stops it. But you see the full complement of Ali's skills put together at one time and exhibited at one time in this fight, which is why so many people point to it as the best performance of Ali's career, where you see everything he can do and everything that he's capable of, and he's not given any real resistance or anything like that by the opposition.
The last fight of the pre-hiatus period, as we're calling it the Cassius Clay period, even though he's Muhammad Ali at this point, he fights Zora Foley on March 22nd, 1967, which he wins by KO in the 7th round. Before I continue, let's just hit this up real quick. Give Zora Foley his due. Because, the fight that I watched between these two, Zora Foley really tried to give Muhammad Ali the business. He went toe-to-toe with him. But as we've said many times throughout this podcast, Ali's just so darn hard to hit. And, after a while, the volume of what Ali throws at you, even if a lot of it's blocked, which much of it was at the beginning of this, just starts to overwhelm people. Even professional fighters at some point just get tired of being hit. But what say you?
Oh, no, I completely agree. And Foley is thought to be on the downside of his career at this point because he's been around for a while. He comes into this fight, Foley's had over 80 professional fights. His record's 74-7-4. And the last time he lost was against Ernie Terrell 4 years prior. And for much of this fight, in the early point, even if he's not winning, he's making Ali work because Foley was a very, very game, very smart defensive fighter. And other than Ali at this point in time, he's probably the best defensive heavyweight that we see. Very adept at using his shoulders, his gloves in high guard, and upper body movement to either ride or block a punch completely from hitting him. The problem for him is that we talked about what a fiend Ali was for conditioning. Ali just was not going to get tired, and Zora Foley didn't have the firepower to keep up with him. And even though Foley, to me, is past his best in this fight, I think this is really the peak of Ali at his best because he is faced with very difficult circumstances and a guy who's not going to allow him just to look good very easy. He's going to make him think, make him work, make him get out everything he needs to get out in order to beat him. And even though Foley never necessarily had Ali in trouble or hurt or anything visibly, it's one of those things where it's almost like watching Ali play with a Rubik's Cube in the ring. He has to use things he may never have called on before, has to grind it out, has to keep working and keep persevering in order to score a win. But when he finally starts to see the pattern develop and he turns it on in that 7th round, he scores this picturesque knockout of Foley that nobody had, done before. Foley got knocked out, I want to say it's about 6-7 years ago before this, by Doug Jones. But that was really a give and take back and forth fight. The only time Foley had ever really been punished and knocked out was by Sonny Liston, and that was one of the fights where it's alleged that Liston had, intentionally blinded his opponent by using some sort of liniment on the glove. So to me, this is Ali at the peak of his powers when we're seeing him at his very best.
Which makes what happens next all the more a bitter pill to swallow. Because the government, not content to just leave the man alone, he was stripped of his title due to his refusal to be drafted to Army service. His boxing license was also suspended by the state of New York and every other state. Finally, he was stripped of his passport. This time, he could not run to Europe to continue fighting. He was then convicted of draft evasion on June 20th and sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. However, he paid his bond, and he remained free while the verdict was appealed, while it was being appealed. This would make him inactive until 1970, where by 1970, the United States public opinion was turning against the war. The war itself was not going well, and in 5 long years, the war will be over as Saigon falls. So, we will continue to talk about the championship reign of Muhammad Ali from 1970 on 2 chapters from now. We're going to take a break and talk about the guy who would pick up the mantle in our next chapter. Chapter 7.
No,
that's what I have here. I have Chapter 7, Smokin' Joe.
We have an interim between that.
Okay.
We have, as a bonus episode, coverage of the 1968 WBA Elimination Tournament to crown a WBA-recognized heavyweight champion in the absence of Muhammad Ali.
Well, this is news to me because this is not what I have in my notes of how we were doing this. So,
Mark, just ignoring us again.
Oh, for goodness sakes. So, I have Chapter 6 is Cassius Clay, and then Chapter 7 is Smokin' Joe Frazier. What am I supposed to do next here?
We are instead going to be covering the 1968 WBA Heavyweight Elimination Tournament.
All right, so Chapter 7 now is the WBA Heavyweight Elimination Tournament. Fantastic. And then Chapter 8 will be Smokin' Joe. Can we finally talk about Smokin' Joe Frazier? That's all I ask.
Probably want to do it more than you do, but we have to cover things correctly.
Okay. So, after that little faux pas there, here's what we have lined up. As I said, we will bring you Chapter 7, the WBA Heavyweight Elimination Tournament, and then we will bring you Smokin' Joe Frazier, and then we will tarry back to Muhammad Ali in Chapter 9. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Fantastic. Well, Pat, I think this was our best show yet. I love talking about Muhammad Ali. When my daughter needed to read a biography for her class, I made her read about Muhammad Ali, and some of it I read to her because she did not know what he sounded like. So I would read the various taunts that the book immortalized, which I thought was great. And she...
You couldn't hire Billy Crystal to do a quick impression for you?
Contrary to popular opinion, all of us Jews don't know each other, so I don't know how to get a hold of Billy Crystal.
I'm a little bit surprised by that.
As are many. So, yes, I would do my spot on Muhammad Ali impression for my daughter. I love this guy. He's one of my favorites. And I'll be very anxious to talk about him again in a few more chapters. All right?
I also look forward to it.
All right, in the meantime, in between time, Pat, how's your quarantine going? You got any projects that you've got lined up? Any podcasts you want to talk about that you're doing?
No, I'm just basically trying not to just check out mentally entirely and trying not to do anything that would create Purge vibes or Mad Max vibes during this time. So I basically do a lot of push-ups. I read a lot. I spend as much time at work as possible because, shockingly, it's actually a cathartic environment for me to be in, as the alternative would be just walking aimlessly through nowhere, and that just doesn't sit well with me.
Fair enough. Well, lucky for you, The Big Show's in a Netflix comedy. Which,
I'm all about that.
Yes, sir. And that comes out April 6th. We'll talk about it on April 16th. And then we'll bring you the next chapter of this probably sometime in May. Believe it or not.
I wonder if The Big Show's sitcom will be better than George Foreman's.
I would think it would have to be. Could it be worse? Is there a level where it would be worse?
I don't know. George Foreman's had Sheryl Lee Ralph, and she's a talented actress.
Yeah, I suppose. I guess we'll find out when we talk about it on a TV party on April 16th. And as I said, we'll bring you probably the next chapter of this, assuming everything stays the way it is right now. Maybe sometime the middle of May, maybe May 11th, maybe May 21st. We'll talk to Pat. We'll figure out what his schedule is. It's very hard to plan things now with all the things that are going on for those of us that are not quarantined. So,
I just see a bunch of people listening to this and hearing that at this point, and they're making like the Ted Knight face in Caddyshack when Danny Noonan's going to putt. Well, we're waiting.
So we'll get that on the schedule at some point, and then you'll find out, and a grand time will be had by all. In the meantime,
in between time,
yes, sir. Robert and I got together twice. It was so nice we did it twice. We reviewed The Gentleman with Matthew McConaughey. We reviewed the entire BoJack Horseman series.
Did you guys review the Impractical Jokers movie yet?
We have not.
That's really a shame because it was fun.
I'm sure it was hilarious. I have not recorded, but I will be recording, and if you've heard this after I recorded it, then I've already recorded my Heaven Shall Burn review. I just needed a night off, so I'll do like I did with Code Orange, since I'm recording these by myself. When I feel like it's sometime between now and Monday. Next week, we'll be Alexis Hayne and I will be debuting a new show called Comic Stripped. We'll be looking at the Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trade paperback and comparing it to the animated movie. On April 7th, myself and the Podsman will be reviewing WrestleMania 36. Too big for one night, so the propagandists tell me.
Yeah, about that.
And in theory, I will be reviewing the new In This Moment album, Mother. So you can check that out.
Wait! In This Moment, that's not a Danzig album.
It's not. In This
Then
Moment,
why did you
it's a
say
band,
Mother?
because the name of the album is called Mother.
Oh well, no.
Just no.
No.
Fair enough.
When are we reviewing Danzig's Elvis covers album? That's what I want to know.
October around Halloween.
That's the show I need to be on.
We'll get you on, I promise. All right. So for the Punchy Pugilist, this has been our history of heavyweight boxing. Be well, be safe, and behave.